Yeah. Okay, I'll make a start then. My name's Jon Perring. I know quite a few of you in the audience today. So I'm the Quality and Compliance Manager with Marshall Centre. So mainly associated with the technical training side of the business. I've been with Marshall a long time. I was an apprentice back in 1990. So I trained as an electrical avionics engineer. And then I progressed on to be a certifying technician, running teams of electricians for modification and maintenance packages on the aircraft, on a variety of aircraft that Marshall work on. 2005, I changed into the quality department, and I spent quite a long time with the quality department, mainly associated with civilian aircraft, so business jets, light aircraft, and large commercial aircraft like your Boeings and your Airbus that you'd go on holiday in. 2017, I made the change into the training department as a regulatory training instructor. So teaching anything with a little bit of a regulatory base to the training associated with the aerospace industry, using my knowledge from times on the shop floor in the hangars and my time with the quality department. And now I find myself as a position of quality and compliance manager. So today we're going to talk about human factors. So I'll share my screen in a minute. I've got a very basic presentation, about 15, 16 slides, just to give us a little bit of some pointers that we're going to run through to discuss human factors. I'm going to make this whenever I'm doing any training, I try and make it quite relaxed and engaging. So I'll ask a lot of questions, so we've got a little bit of talking between us, so you haven't got me just talking at you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn my camera off, and then I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation running. Okay, can everyone see my screen there? So you should have a screen with human factors written on it.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah,
excellent. Okay, so before I sort of describe what human factors is, we cover it quite heavily in the aerospace industry, and the medical industry will also cover this quite heavily. And it's a subject that anyone can get involved with. So it's quite a good subject to do today. You don't have to be associated with aircraft maintenance. You can be from any walk of life. We could grab someone off the street now and they could be involved in this presentation and have an input into it and understand it. So a few key points we're going to discuss today. We're going to have a look at, I'm going to start with what actually is human factors. So form a bit of an introduction from there. We're going to look at incidents having common features. So it doesn't matter if we've had an incident, an accident in any walk of life, they can all have common features and things that may have caused them. We're going to talk about reporting things, hazards and occurrences and why we do that. We're going to talk about splitting things up into 4 principal topics, and that will flow into a couple of models we've got here. We've got a shell model and a Swiss cheese model, and I'll explain those as we go through. And we're going to talk about how important communication is. So if I start with my first question for you, if I said, what is human factors? Has anyone heard, firstly, has anyone heard of the phrase human factors?
Yeah, I have.
You have.
I've got a friend who's really high up in nuclear, in human factors, and he talks to me about it all the time. So, and I wind him up saying health and safety, but I wouldn't do that to you though, John. I wouldn't do that to you though, John.
Okay, no, I know you wouldn't. You'd be too kind to me. Have you got, from what he said to you then, Phil, would you be able to put what he's described it as into just a few words?
I like the example that he gives me when he did a piece of work for Johnny Walker up in Scotland in their whiskey factories, and he said basically the human factor side of things is so that there's like a pump for the whiskey, and basically if anything happens or if that switch is pumped the wrong way, that essentially can create spillage, and spillage at whiskey at that level can cost like hundreds of thousands of pounds per like minute or whatever it was.
Yep.
He said basically by putting in a control which stopped that switch being done, it saved them like hundreds of thousands. So it's a whole consultation piece around that. So it's that human element of impact of what they have to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. That's not a bad example. So we're almost thinking of as a design kind of aspect. So I'll put a few words on the screen. So we've got here the discipline of optimizing human performance in the workplace, so without compromising safety. So you've given an example there, Phil, really. So when you've got a design engineer and they're designing a system, and it doesn't matter whether it's in that whiskey factory, on an aircraft, a car, whatever, they can design potential error into a system or design it out. So like you've said, putting something where you can only have this valve going one way, or you could have, say your connections on the back of your TV, they're all different sizes and different types, and that will stop you getting things mixed up. So if we make things different sizes or put some sort of keyway or lock in them where you can only fit them in certain places, we can design error out of a system. And human factors, so we could put into human factors that is optimizing that human performance. There's a little bit of psychology into it. So why do people make mistakes? And when we see something that's happened, there's been an accident. So is it directly that person's fault, or have they been set up to fail? And that could be a multitude of things that have caused that failure. And it's also all about continuous improvement, highlighting near misses, prevent reoccurrence, all sorts like that. So on the next slide here, we've got on the left hand side here, it says when we have something go wrong, machines have become a lot more reliable than they used to be. So the actual failure of the machine, the car, the aircraft, the train, any piece of equipment we're using, it's only really 20% of the reason why we've had that incident or accident. The 80% is actually the human element. They've operated that machine wrong, an error of judgment, something like that. And then if we move on to the next pie chart that's on the right hand side, it's taking that 80% and then splitting that down further. So it's saying 30% is an individual mistake, it is that person, but 70% is organizational weaknesses. So if we put that into the workplace, it's your company not giving you everything you need to succeed. So like I say, setting someone up in such a way where they're trained, they've got all the tools, equipment, the data, everything, you're setting them up to succeed. If their training is lacking, we haven't got the right tooling, we haven't got the right time to do a job, then we're setting that person up to fail. Does that make sense to everyone, that introduction that I've given there?
Yes, thanks, John.
Has anyone got any questions from that initial stage?
No.
Okay. So I'll move us on a little here. We've got a slide here, and we've got various accidents. So it doesn't matter, like I said, whether it's the aerospace industry, a road accident, trains. There's a chain. You can often see things drawn out as a chain, and they call it an error chain. So as it's saying there, it's rare that we have an incident or accident and it's just one person's fault and they're wholly responsible for that. It's all like a chain of events, and it could be there's some time pressures, it could be distractions, it could be a lack of training. And if we took the car incident in the middle of the picture there, so sort of wrong place, wrong time, under a bit of time pressures, might have been going too fast, might have been a distraction, could have been weather conditions, could have been other road users, volume of traffic, and there's a multitude of things that will cause an event. But all these, there's key factors that will keep coming up and up again, and it will be those ones like I've mentioned: distraction, time pressures, poor communication. We're gonna discuss communication a little bit later, in this presentation and say how fundamental that is in all aspects of life, whether you're in work or out of work. And we're going to think about how people make mistakes and why people make mistakes. So, on the next slide here, there's two statements. So we're going to discuss those a little bit further. So if I look at the top one to start with, the best people make the worst mistakes. Now that sounds a little bit of a contradiction of terms, doesn't it? The very best, but they're making the worst mistakes. How could that be then?
I would say that's got to do with how risk averse you are. So people who are really confident in their abilities will probably be more open to taking bigger risks.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd say the same. If you're curious and you're thinking of something new, it's not always going to go right, and you take that risk, but knowing that it might not go right. But that's how you learn.
Yeah, that's right. So there's many angles you can think about this, and there's a fine line in life between being assertive and confident and actually getting overconfident, or actually we're not confident enough, so we're kind of dithering and, oh, shall I do that? Shouldn't I do it? And it's getting that balance where you've got that even kind of line where you're confident and assertive, but you're not overconfident. And the best people making the worst mistakes. Well, if you had a job and you were under a lot of pressure to do it, who would you pick to do that job? The high pressure jobs, the complex jobs. Who would you pick?
You think can do it.
You're going to pick your best, aren't you?
Yeah.
Your very best people. So those people that are knowledgeable, and we've all got them in our teams. People that are really naturally sort of quite gifted at what they do. We're also going to naturally pick those to do the jobs that are most pressured and most complex. So we're almost putting them up on a pedestal, whether they want to be there or not. And if a job is more complex and under more time pressure, then when a mistake actually happens, it's going to be a far bigger and worse mistake than actually a very basic job that you'd give a more junior employee. What about the second statement there then, or second question? How can you guarantee you never ever make a mistake?
Do nothing.
Do nothing. That is exactly right. So as soon as you have a go at anything, particularly if it's something new, there's always going to be that opportunity for mistake. If we actually just sit there and do nothing, then we're not going to make a mistake. But then we're never going to actually progress in life, are we? And the people, going back to that top statement, those best people, most experienced people, well, they've got there by a lot of education, by teaching themselves, and also by making mistakes. When you make mistakes, even if it's not something massive, it's those little mistakes that keep something in your mind, and you'll learn a lot from them. And the same if you're on a training course and you get asked some questions and you give an answer and it's wrong, but then you get it explained to you. That then correct answer really sticks in your mind, and so it's kind of helpful and healthy to make mistakes to a certain degree, as long as they're not, like a dangerous situation. So whenever I'm talking and I'm teaching anything associated with human factors or with regulation, I always say sometimes things can get quite complex, particularly when you're talking about regulations and approvals of companies. We can also get quite complicated talking about different things that have gone wrong with human factors, but you can kind of draw that back into a simple kind of concept. And like I say, it doesn't matter if I'm talking about human factors as I am today or regulation. I've been talking the two previous days with Bombardier at Biggin Hill. I will always mention 4 principal topics for any business. Now, there's 4 things that a business needs if you're setting up a business or you're expanding a business. Have you got any idea what I'm sort of leading towards there? 4 key things you need.
Resource.
Yeah, resources. Yeah, and resources covers a multitude of things. That could be people resources, all sorts, couldn't it? What else do you think you need?
A business plan.
Yeah. So I would probably put your business plan could be becoming more of a data. You're going to need some data. So we sort of mentioned data. So whether it's plans or documents we're going to work to, could be maintenance manuals, instructions, company procedures. And we've mentioned resources. So if we say resources, will cover a manpower element. So we've got your manpower being right from the top, the very top level manager, right the way through all the different levels within the business. So we've got data and we've got people. What else do we need in our business?
Facilities.
What was that? Sorry, that was a little bit quiet.
Facilities.
A facility. Yeah, we're going to need a facility, aren't we? Whether it's an office, an aircraft hangar, a garage to service your car, we're going to need an appropriate facility. And the last one will be our tools, equipment and materials. So I'll always describe this. And like I say, it can feed into what we're looking at today, human factors, and it can feed into regulation. So we're going to need a facility and we're going to need somewhere to work. So like I say, it could be offices, hangars, anything. Tooling. Now that tooling could be a garage mechanic's toolbox, a mechanic in the hangars, but it could equally be someone working in an office and their tooling is going to be their laptop, their computer, their monitor, their tablets that they're using. Manpower, we've obviously got manpower in every part of a business with expertise covering whatever they're particularly trained to work towards. And the data, like I say, a multitude of things. Could be company approvals, could be planning, as Matt just said to us, maintenance manuals, all sorts. So if you were going to set up a business today, that's the 4 things you'd need to do or need to look at. If you were going to expand a business today, they're the 4 key things you're going to need to look at. Leading this back into human factors, when things go wrong, it's those 4 key topics. So was there a problem with the facility? Was that not fit for purpose? So we're thinking, was it an inadequate workshop? Was the hangar not fit for purpose that the aircraft was in? Was the lighting inadequate? Did we not have appropriate heating, electrical supplies, all sorts like that? Tooling and equipment, so that the person made a mistake, and was it due to they didn't have the correct tooling? Was there an IT problem? Was there a problem with the mechanic's toolkit? So we've got tooling and equipment, and also within that group, materials. So the actual materials and products we're using, whether that's paper or something we're using in a photocopier, or it could be some nuts, bolts, washers, whatever we're using in the hangar or in a workshop or in a garage. And then your manpower. So is your manpower, is it trained adequately? Have you got enough manpower? All sorts going on there. And the data. So what sort of problems could we have with data?
If it's current, if it's correct.
Yeah, is it the latest issue of data? Is it correct for that aircraft type, for that car that's being worked in the garage, for that product that's being made, for that system that you're making? Is that data easily accessible? There's no point having all data for people to work to if it's hidden in a manager's office. It needs to be in the office, in the hangar, out in the garage where the mechanics are. It needs to be easily accessible, up to date, as Matt's just said to us there. And what about sometimes when we're reading through processes and data, are they always easy to read?
No, sometimes there's grey areas that are open to interpretation, and that's quite dangerous.
It is, because the danger there, me and you could be working together, Janine, and I'll read something and you'll read it and I'll go, come on then, let's go and do this job. And I'll go, what have you got all that equipment for, or why are you going there? And we've actually read the same page in a manual or a procedure, and we've kind of interpreted that totally different ways. So, and people criticize a lot of process and procedure and manuals, but actually when you try to write something yourself, it's very hard when you're writing an instruction or a process flow or a plan for someone. It's very hard to write it in such a way that it's not ambiguous. And we're going to cover a little bit more about interpretation of information and material when we go into communication. We're going to talk about what makes up communication. If you were to go on the internet and put in human factors, you can quite often find this model we've got here called a shell model. And it kind of links back to what I've just said about facilities, tools, manpower, data. So it's called a shell model because it's S-H-E-L, and we've got like a double L, and I'll explain that in a minute. So your S that we've got here is for software. So that's going to be the data as we were just describing there. That could be in paper format, or it could be electronic format, really doesn't matter. And then we've got hardware. Well, that's going to be really your tools and equipment that I was talking about. So you could be in an office with your laptop or your computer and your monitors, or you could be in an engineering environment with your tools, machinery, lathes, drills, all sorts like that. And that hardware could also be the aircraft you're working on itself, or the car you're working on itself, or the machinery you're working on. And then we've got E for environment. So that's going to be your facility, wherever you're working, office, hangar, garage, outside, wherever we are. And then we've got liveware, which is people. So you've got in red, the L in the middle, liveware, that's you as a person. And then we've got L again in pink, and that's liveware, that's other people you're integrating with. So sometimes we can work in a team and we really settle into a team, and other times that's not so easy. You can have clash of personalities and all sorts of things. And then we've got this kind of circular orbit running round, and that's got M for management in it, and how management interact with all aspects of this. So does that make sense for everyone, what I've described there, that shell model? And that really summarises a lot of human factors and where all the elements can come from. So like I say, problems with your software, hardware, environment, or the team that you're working with. Have you got any questions so far, or is everyone okay? Okay. Right.
Oh, good. We are still here, John.
Yeah, but I'm always quite relaxed, and I always say, look, there's no pressure with questions, because if I ask a question and it goes silent for long enough, I answer my own questions. So it's all relaxed. It's all good. All right. Okay. So another a model. So we said that shell model. Another model you'll see is they call it a Swiss cheese model, and we've got a couple of examples on the screen here. And the idea is that to prevent incidents and accidents, we have all like safety barriers or layers. So you could say, I've mentioned training, processes and procedures, company approvals, health and safety equipment, correct tooling. All of these, we could say, are layers of safety. And there's always going to be little problems. There's very few things in life that are perfect, and that doesn't matter whether it's in the workplace or in home life. Very few things are absolutely perfect, so there's always little holes and errors in them. But the problem is when there's holes in all these barriers or these elements, but the holes all line up, because then that's when the error comes all the way through them and we end up with an incident or accident. I've got this Swiss cheese model repeated here, and this is something quite topical on the right hand side. So we've got this Swiss cheese model of COVID-19. So where I said we've got barriers to stop accidents, incidents, and we've got that with COVID. So we've got actual physical distancing, so your social distancing. We've got wearing face masks. We've got hand hygiene, so washing our hands, hand gel. We've got ventilating rooms, so at school, they're trying to keep all the windows open. Whenever I'm delivering any training, I always try and keep the door open the windows, get a little bit of ventilation going. We've got the tracing of when someone has caught the COVID, and we've got disinfection, and we've got the screening and testing. Now, if we have, say we had hand hygiene and it wasn't fantastic, but actually we've got social distancing, face masks, ventilation, all the tracing, we're probably still going to be all right. And the same as if we had face masks on, social distancing, but the ventilation in a room wasn't fantastic. So one of those layers, or even two of those layers, has got some problems. We're still not going to get the actual problem or accident come right the way through from the start to the finish. But if we start to have holes and errors in all of these, that's when it can line up and actually come through. And that's when we're going to catch the COVID illness. We're going to have that car crash. There's going to be a maintenance accident in a garage or an aircraft hangar. And that's when these problems happen, when we've got holes in everything. Does that make sense for everyone, what I've described there?
Yep.
Okay. And also, when we're following a company process or a maintenance manual, and we've got where, like we said, of someone that's quite experienced, don't bother doing stage 5 out of 10, that's fine. We can skip that and move on to this. It's when you sort of cut corners more and more and more, eventually there will be an incident or accident. We've got processes and procedures put in place for a reason, and it's to follow them so that we get the result that we want at the end. So when we're in the workplace, we can see things are wrong from time to time. And sometimes, where I've just said following a maintenance manual or a company process, you can think that's not very good to follow. It's not very well written, and it doesn't actually work. That leads us on to reporting. So reporting seems to be getting a bigger and bigger thing generally in life, I think, and many companies will encourage you or their employees to report things. Why do companies encourage us to report things? What are they going to gain out of that?
To learn from mistakes.
To learn from mistakes, yeah. And it doesn't even have to be a mistake. It could be a near miss, couldn't it? You could have nearly been involved with an accident, nearly got hit by a bit of machinery or an aircraft moving or something like that. And so if we report, so we're really splitting into two halves: occurrences, so something has actually occurred, or a hazard that's a near miss. And you'll often see it drawn out as this iceberg that we've got here. And what it's saying is we've got this fatal accident right at the top, a really serious accident. And that happened, and many people could see lots of little problems that were leading up to that. And we've got these 600 unsafe acts. We've got 30 things that really should have been reported. And we've got 10 quite serious accidents. They weren't fatal, but they really should have been reported. So we're trying to say that actually the top level accident that happened is just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much that could have been reported underneath. And if we report these lower level items, that should actually cut this off dead in the water here, and we should never actually get to this top level incident. And on a large company, they'll really try and push this, because you could have something that happens in one area of the business and then it's repeated again and again and again. So if we don't communicate this and we don't highlight problems and report things, then we're going to have these accidents, and we could quite easily prevent them. Everyone okay with that?
Yes, thank you, John.
Okay. So, where I mentioned there's a few key things if you look on the internet and put in human factors. I mean, it was the Shell model and that Swiss cheese model. Another thing that you'll quite often see is so human factors and the dirty dozen. And what this concept is all about is summarising human factors into 12 key points. And I'm going to run through these and get some of your thoughts on them and your understanding of them. So when we're talking about incidents and accidents and things going wrong, why do we think that top of that list there we've got a lack of communication? How can a lack of communication cause problems? Well, at work or out of work, it really doesn't matter. How could it cause problems with life in general? Lack of communication. What do you think?
Perhaps the message that was intended wasn't received correctly.
Yeah. So maybe it wasn't explained very well, or the method of communication wasn't correct, or as Janine said earlier, misinterpreting something that's in a written format. I've read it one way and Janine's read it totally another. Yeah, very good. Do we think that's that in life that communication and in the workplace is really, really important? Do we all agree that that is important?
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And then if I move us on to the next point then, so we've got complacency. So how can complacency cause incidents and accidents?
I think if you've done something one way for a long time, even if it was unsafe, but you've never had an incident, you just get used to doing it that way. Or if you're working with very old or faulty equipment that it hasn't given out just yet.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's good examples. And we can think of the most simple things like, so people speeding on a regular basis. Well, I'll never get caught. There's never a speed camera and there's never many people around. But actually today, there are some people around. There's a group of children unexpectedly in that area, and obviously that risk has now gone right up. So we can get quite complacent, and maybe the complacency can grow. We can think, well, we've got away with that was quite easy, and then we take more and more risks. What about a lack of knowledge then? How does that lead to incidents and accidents? What do you think there? Anyone got ideas?
People make assumptions or fill in the gaps themselves.
Yeah, the filling in the gaps is quite a big thing, isn't there? And yeah, that's not fully explained. Oh, well, I think it means this, so we'll just do it. So yeah, so knowledge and training is very important. And if you are, I don't know, being moved to a different area of a business and your role changes within the business, very important that you're trained. And again, going back to that phrase, you're set up to succeed rather than set up to fail, being thrown in at the deep end. So what about distractions then? How do distractions cause us problems, cause us human factors? Do we think we have lots of distractions on a daily basis? What sort of things will we have to distract us?
Phone calls, time pressure at home.
Yeah. And yeah, so you mentioned at home, so we've got working from home, so relatively new concept really there for many people. So you've got a little bit of home life going on in the background and you're trying to concentrate on your day job as well. Phone calls, emails, text messages, all sorts going on when you're trying to focus on a particular job. What about a lack of teamwork then? How can that cause us problems? Do we think that's important? Teamwork?
Definitely, everybody needs to sort of contribute, take an equal amount. It could cause resentment if people aren't contributing as much as others feel that they should.
I think you're exactly right, Liz. Yeah, definitely. And we all want to get on with each other, really, don't we? It makes your day a lot easier. And like I say, if you work in a team and you already get on, it makes it a pleasure, really. If there's a clash of personalities, it can make it very difficult, and then that leads us back to distractions. You're more focused on being annoyed with someone than you are actually concentrating on the job itself. What about fatigue then? How can that impact us?
I think when you're tired, you get a lot of brain fog. You're not going to be able to focus.
That's right. And sometimes you need to step away, don't you? Have that 15-minute break, maybe have a drink or whatever, and then come back, and you're spending a bit of time to save some time. So lack of resources there. Well, lack of resources could mean a multitude of things: lack of tooling, lack of data, lack of people. And then a lot of these are interlinked. So we've got that time pressure, and time pressure I'm going to link in with stress. Do you think they can have a big impact on our working day? Pressures and stress.
Yeah, you're perhaps not going to be able to do your job as well if you feel stressed or pressured to do it.
Yeah, and again, if you've got that atmosphere and it's quite stressful and pressured, then you're not in that right frame of mind. That's then going to lead us back to fatigue. The stress and pressure is an element of distraction in itself. What do you think's meant by the lack of awareness? What do we think we're talking about there?
Perhaps of other people's workloads or stresses?
Yeah, there is. Yes. You're trying to focus and concentrate on your job, but actually it's good, particularly if you're part of a team, to be aware of what's going on around you, other people's workload, what other people are doing. Also, from a kind of danger point of view, if you're in more of an engineering environment, a kind of manual working environment. So if you're on an aircraft and you're part of a team there, you're really concentrating on your job, you're fitting this component, you've got to be aware of what's going on around you. There could be various electrical systems, hydraulic systems operating, things moving. So you want to concentrate and avoid distraction, but you've got to be aware of what's going on around you. Is there propellers on the aircraft turning because the engines are running? And thinking about, it's not just the job you're doing, it's the environment you're doing it in. Are you inside, outside, and all sorts of things can affect things. The last one, called norms. What are norms?
The way it's always been done.
Yeah, we've always done it like that. Is that always the right way, just because everyone's always done it like that?
No, it's not right. It's because perhaps people aren't thinking of a safer way or a more efficient way of doing it. It's we've always done it that way. It's very legacy, isn't it? That's
right. Yeah. And the trouble is, someone will initially read how to do something in a process or a procedure. Oh, and I'm going to trim that down and do it my way. And then they can teach someone else, and then they'll trim that down again and make it their way. And before you know it, you've cut a lot of corners and we've got a lot of problems. So if I take us back up to the top, back to communication. And if I said communication is made up of 3 parts, would you know what those 3 parts are?
Non-verbal communication is probably the biggest part.
Yeah, so what you're thinking, like body language, that sort of thing, Janine?
Yeah, body language, facial expressions, tone of voice.
Tone of voice, very good. Very good. So we've got verbal. So it's the actual words that I'm saying to you now. We've got a tone of voice. Now, people think it's all about the words, but sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So we've got that tone of voice. So am I coming across relaxed and calm? Am I coming across upset? Am I coming across quite aggressive? And that can make a massive difference. And the body language. So particularly when you're in a teaching environment and you're looking around a room, you can pick up a lot of body language with people. Are they concentrating? Are they looking? Do they seem to be engaging, or are they staring at the ceiling, looking at their phone? What are they doing? And we need those three elements to get the full kind of package of communication. Keeping on that topic there, what sort of percentage weighting do you think that each of those would have? Do you think they're 33 1/3 each of them, and it's an even split, or do you think it's vastly different from that? What have people got as ideas?
Verbal is ridiculously low. Something like 3 to 7% is verbal communication, and tone of voice would be next, but body language is probably 80 to 90%.
It's good. Yeah. What does anyone else think? Does anyone else think differently? So Janine was saying sort of your very low single figures there for your tone of voice, and you could be, I don't know, what about 20% for tone of voice there, and then your body language you're looking at around the 70% mark, maybe up to 80, something like that. Does anyone else think differently from that? I usually get a few people to have a few thoughts here on this. What do we think? Or do some people think it's more of an even split? Okay, let's move on. So on the slide here, I've got this is only one survey that's done on it, and whether you agree with these results or not, it does show us that you need all three elements. So what we got on the screen here, so you said around the 3 to 7% mark, Janine. Yeah, exactly right. Tone of voice, they're saying around that kind of 38, and we pick a lot up on visual. And I think you can compare that and sort of keeping it on topic for today. Again, going back where we've been wearing a lot of face masks recently, you can miss out on a lot of that visual. And I don't think any of us really realised how much we actually lip read. So we look at someone when they're talking, and we are listening, but we pick up a lot, and we fill in the missing gaps by lip reading. When someone's wearing a mask, there's a lot more what did you just say, what, and a lot harder to communicate. And also, if I take us back and we're just looking at verbal, so I said it's quite hard to write process and procedure, maintenance manuals, communicating well on an email. And the reason why that's so difficult is because all you've got is the words. So how many times have we had a text message or an email and thought, what on earth does that mean? Or that's quite rude. But then when you actually talk to the person, what is that supposed to mean? Oh, no, I didn't mean it like that. So it's very hard when we're purely reliant on verbal. And that can be very hard for people where they do shift work and they're handing over maybe a 4x4 shift from one shift to another, or from nights to days, days to nights, and you're reliant on only a shift handover book, so the written word. In an ideal world, we would want that written word backed up by me on one shift talking to Liz on the other shift, for example, like that. So it's hard unless you've got that full sort of three-way package there. What do people think to those results? Have they found those surprising, or would they think that they were around those kind of percentages?
The verbal one, I always thought that was quite a low one, John.
Yeah, I think, and even if we take away the verbal and the tone of voice, that visual, we quite often, when we are going to meet someone or we see someone for the first time, we make a big first impression, don't we, on that visual. Just when you see someone enter a room, you make a first impression of someone, and it's very much on that visual even before they've said anything at all. Okay, so we've talked about human factors being all sorts of things coming into it. Like I said, it can be maximising efficiency of people. You've got ergonomics, things being designed for people. We've got distractions. We've got a psychology element. We've got all sorts going on. And I've said, when we have something go wrong, it's wrong just to instantly go, well, it's that person's fault. And there could be a multitude of things that have led up to it. So I've got this picture here. We're sort of coming towards the end of the presentation now, and this will sort of sum it up quite nicely. So we've got this little vehicle here, and it's driven onto this concrete. So first impressions, you could say, what did the driver drive on that for? That was a stupid thing to do. But could there be more behind the scenes here, do you think? So is it just the driver's fault? What else could have gone on?
I think the driver is the right at the bottom of the fault. We could have had some cones out there or some signs.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So we look around there, and like Liz has just said to us, well, there's no cones, no barrier, no nothing. And then you go, well, yeah, but surely you can still see a difference. Yeah, but was it early hours of the morning or the middle of the night? And actually, if you think wet concrete and the rest of that concrete looks quite wet, would you actually, early hours of the morning, be able to tell the difference? So it probably comes as quite a shock when he's driven onto that. And then you go, well, okay, it's not the driver's fault then. And the whole thing we're thinking about with this human factors is, if we just take that driver out of the vehicle and we discipline him, is that going to stop that problem ever happening again? Well, no, it's not, is it? So we've got to think a little bit deeper. So Liz was on the right lines there. We're putting the cones or the barriers around, and that's great. So then you go, well, it was the builders that were putting that concrete down then. But then maybe they tried to get the cones and barriers. So they went to stores. I need all these cones and barriers I'm going to put around here. And they didn't have those available. So we're starting to take back further and further and further. So they tried their very best, but they weren't available in stores. Why weren't they available? Well, they couldn't get hold of them. They ordered them. They didn't arrive in time, or actually no one had considered it. So was it, going back to a comment that Matt said at the beginning about planning of tasks? Was there a lack of planning? So we could be moving sort of higher and higher up in an organisation. Could be more onto looking at the management of tasks rather than the people actually doing that tasks. So again, it's all about setting people up to succeed rather than setting them up to fail. Has anyone got any questions for me there? So, quick summary of what we've covered today. We started off, we did actually what is human factors and how does it relate into general life, into the workplace, into a multitude of different kind of industries, into everything really, and how everyone can have their sort of say, and people have joined in with comments this afternoon, and it proves that all of us from different areas of a business, different businesses, we can all have an input into this topic. We've said that all accidents have common features. Doesn't matter if it's a maintenance incident on an aircraft, it's a car crash, or someone's just dropped something. They all have common features, things like distraction, poor communication. We talked about reporting hazards and occurrences, and if we report things, then we're going to have that continuous improvement and open, honest kind of culture within a business. We talked about 4 principal topics that will always relate to a business, to regulations and to human factors. So that facilities, tools, manpower and data. That was then pictured in a different way in the shell model with software, hardware, environment, liveware, all mentioned. We had the Swiss cheese model with layers of protection, and it's when we start to degrade all these layers when we can have a problem. And how human factors can be summed up as the dirty dozen there, so those 12 key points. And we picked out of that dirty dozen that communication is really, really vital in all aspects of life. And communication is very difficult unless we've got those three key elements to it. So that verbal, that tone of voice, and the body language. And it's quite often, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And then we summarised today on that simple example. So I'm going to come back onto the screen now with my face rather than the presentation. Okay, thanks to everyone for attending that and joining in with that. We've had a little bit of a discussion, and hopefully it's given you a little bit of an insight into the subject. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask at the end of that?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed that, John. Thanks ever so much.
Good. No, thanks, and thanks for everyone that's joining in. If it's if no one joins in, I normally go, "Oh, come on, look, you're killing me out here. Let's have a little bit of involvement." And we all want a conversation. You don't want a one-way conversation, do you, where you're being talked at? So it's good to have people joining in. So thanks very much for that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really good.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yep, you too.